The emergency convocation chamber thrummed with tension. The High Priest Karuan, once a pillar of unwavering authority, moved among the alien delegates like a man caught in a tide far stronger than his own resolve. His staff, still abandoned on the floor, had become a symbol not of power, but of failure. Each delegate's multifaceted eyes darted nervously between him and the human, Elias Ward, who now stood at the center, calm and unassuming, as though he belonged more to the universe than they ever could. Karuan's voice, usually echoing with divine certainty, now trembled with the weight of contradiction. "You dare speak in the first tongue before the assembly? Do you not understand the heresy you commit?" Elias's gaze swept over the convocation. His calmness was deliberate, a contrast meant to unsettle. "I speak only what history demands be heard," he replied. "These walls are built on the echoes of my species. Every command you issue, every law you enforce, derives from words that were ours first." A murmur rose among the delegates. Some gasped, others recoiled. The first tongue had been forbidden in public discourse for millennia. It was the language of creation, the code that had structured civilizations long before the Concord's founding. That a human could speak it so fluently left no room for denial. Karuan forced himself forward, gathering the remnants of his composure. "Even if your words carry history," he said, "you do not command it. You are but a single species, exiled and forgotten. What authority do you claim?" Elias's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained steady. "Authority does not come from title or station, priest. It comes from understanding. You misinterpret relics as divinity, symbols as commandments. I am here to restore context." He moved toward the central dais, fingers brushing the walls as if coaxing dormant memories to life. Alien symbols shimmered faintly beneath his touch, rearranging into sequences none of the delegates could decipher. Gasps and whispers erupted. The chamber vibrated with energy, subtle but unmistakable. Some delegates shrank back, as if the walls themselves were warning them. Karuan's claws scraped against stone. "What were you doing?" "Awakening," Elias said simply. "These glyphs were never meant to bless or curse. They were warnings. Safeguards. You have misread them for millennia." The high priest staggered, realization dawning. He had memorized every sacred inscription, every incantation, every fragment of holy knowledge, and yet none of it had prepared him for this revelation. "If what you say is true, then everything we revere is built on misunderstanding," he whispered. "Misunderstanding is a form of survival," Elias replied. "Your species turned warnings into gods, systems into rituals. You preserve the structure, but not the truth." A low hum began to fill the chamber. The walls, alive in their own right, pulsed as though acknowledging the human's words. Delegates instinctively retreated, recognizing the authority not in rank, but in resonance. Elias's presence activated the temple's latent systems, systems designed long before the first alien congregation had been conceived. "You awaken more than history," Karuan said, his voice tight with fear. "You awaken power no one can control." Elias paused and looked directly at him. "We once walked the galaxy with that power, priest. We chose exile because it demanded responsibility. Now, you are wielding it recklessly." For the first time, Karuan felt the full weight of his failures. His faith, meticulously cultivated over decades, trembled on the edge of collapse. The stories he had trusted, the rituals he had enforced, even the Concord itself, everything was built atop the remnants of a species he had considered inferior, exiled, almost mythic. The chamber grew still. Even the humming walls seemed to pause, awaiting the next move. Elias lifted his hand toward the dais. Symbols ignited along the floor, forming patterns older than recorded history. Delegates gasped, clutching at each other in alarm. Karuan fell to his knees. His claws scraped the floor in a futile attempt at grounding himself. Why return now?" he asked, voice barely audible over the hum. "Because you are listening," Elias replied. "Because the systems you awaken cannot respond to ritual or faith alone. They respond to understanding, to intent. And you have none. The tremors in the chamber intensified. The walls, the glyphs, the very structure of the temple vibrated in recognition of the human's presence. Karuan's mind raced, trying to reconcile millennia of doctrine with this living proof of human precedence. Elias's voice rose, calm but commanding. You have a choice. You can continue to interpret our legacy as religion, or you can acknowledge it as history and act accordingly. Only then can the galaxy avoid repeating its mistakes. A tense silence followed, pregnant with possibility and peril. Delegates turned to Karuan, seeking leadership, guidance, some semblance of certainty. He had none. All he had were questions, and a dawning awareness that the human before him was not merely a visitor from a forgotten world. He was the inheritor of truths the galaxy had buried in fear. Elias's gaze swept the chamber one final time, lingering on the priest. I do not come to conquer. I come to remind. History speaks first. And now history speaks through me. The walls glowed faintly, alive with recognition, as though the temple itself had chosen a new voice. The high priest Karuan's shoulders sagged, staff abandoned, authority shattered. He realized that the central conflict was no longer about faith or supremacy. It was about who would command the story of the galaxy, the species that had hidden or the species that had always spoken first. And in that moment, Elias Ward, human, exiled, and returned, became the axis upon which the galaxy's future would pivot. The chamber reserved for private deliberation was smaller than the great assembly hall, yet somehow heavier with expectation. Its walls pulsed faintly, grown living stone that seemed to breathe with a memory older than most stars. High Priest Karuan stood at the center, his ceremonial robes rustling like dry leaves, his hands tight around the staff he had dropped in the public hall. Across from him, Elias Ward, the human who had stunned the congregation, remained unshackled, unflinching, as though the weight of millennia rested lightly upon him. Karuan's voice was low, almost trembling. You spoke the first tongue, as if it were your native speech. No hesitation. No translation. That language has been dead for 112 millennia. Elias inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than submission. Dead is not the same as forgotten, he said. The priest's multifaceted eyes narrowed. It predates my species. It predates the Concord. It was catalogued, sealed, and buried before your world even had orbiting satellites. How? His words faltered. How do you know it? I did not learn it, Elias said evenly. It is embedded. In myths, rituals, songs. In the bones of my ancestors. We remember, without realizing it. Karuan's claws scraped the stone floor in agitation. Impossible. Humans were observed as a fledgling species barely capable of interstellar travel when we first catalogued your world. Nothing in your history could account for this knowledge. Elias's gaze met the priest's without fear. You observed us. You recorded fragments. But you never understood. That knowledge was never lost. It was hidden. We chose to withdraw before the galaxy could misuse it. The priest staggered back, involuntarily gripping the staff as if it might anchor his crumbling certainty. You are claiming your species is older than recorded history? That humans shaped the early structures of civilization in the galaxy. Not shaped, survived, Elias corrected. And the traces you study as sacred, your holy scripts, they are fragments of warnings, not blessings. You turned instruction into dogma. Karuan's mind raced. For decades, he had memorized every line of the Concord's archives, every chant, every sacred glyph. And now each of those memories trembled under a single human's words. If what you say is true, he whispered, voice barely audible, then our religion, our history, everything we believe in, is built on a lie. Not a lie, Elias said. A survival mechanism. You interpreted what you did not understand, just as every species does when faced with knowledge beyond their grasp. The priest took a deep breath, feeling the chamber's living walls react to his stress. They pulsed faintly, thrumming in resonance with the human presence. Elias lifted his hand and spoke a single, ancient word. The air shimmered. Symbols along the walls glowed, rearranging themselves into sequences Karuan recognized from forbidden archives. He staggered. Only architect-coded phonemes could trigger. The architects? Elias said softly. They were not your ancestors. They were ours. Karuan's knees buckled slightly as the weight of that claim sank in. Your species, he began, then stopped, unable to finish the thought. But the architects disappeared before recorded time. We never disappeared, Elias replied. We withdrew. We left intentionally so the galaxy could survive without us until it was ready. We spoke in silence so you could write your history unimpeded, so you could build your temples and systems without us interfering. And yet, you began to awaken what you could not comprehend. A tremor ran through the chamber. The living walls seemed to shiver in recognition. Karuan felt the temple itself watching, its consciousness acknowledging the truth in the human's voice. Why reveal this now? Karuan asked, voice trembling. Why speak the first tongue openly after all these millennia? Elias's expression hardened, calm but unyielding. Because you started asking the wrong questions. Because you began digging into systems and scripts you cannot fully command. And because the legacy of my people, the words, the safeguards, the history, must be restored before catastrophe strikes. The priest sank onto the stone bench behind him, staff abandoned, his authority shattered. You mean the galaxy has been running on our remnants all this time? Yes, Elias said. And not as you were told. As safeguards, warnings, and truths. You took fragments of my people's language, systems, and warnings, and you called them divine. Faith replaced understanding. Ritual replaced responsibility. You are powerful, priest, but without context, you are dangerous. A second tremor passed through the chamber. The walls pulsed brighter this time, symbols rearranging to reflect deeper patterns. Even Karuan could see now that the first tongue was not a relic. It was a living system, a matrix of encoded knowledge designed to awaken only when its purpose was understood, and now it had recognized Elias. You are not here to destroy us, Karuan whispered, all mingling with fear. No, Elias said. I am here to remind you. Humanity withdrew for a reason. But history does not wait forever. It speaks first, and now it speaks again through us. The tremor subsided, leaving the chamber charged with a strange, anticipatory energy. Karuan's shoulders sagged under the realization that the central conflict was no longer theoretical. Humanity, long believed absent, had returned. The priest and his species were no longer the arbiters of history, they were witnesses to it. And in that moment, Elias Ward, human, exiled, and returned, became the axis upon which the galaxy's understanding of its own past would pivot. The convocation chamber was a storm of motion and disbelief. Delegates from 1,000 star systems had gathered, their shimmering appendages bristling with alarm as High Priest Karuan, still shaken from his private reckoning, struggled to maintain control. His robes, once symbols of absolute authority, now hung like shrouds over a figure desperate to assert dominance he no longer possessed. Elias Ward stood at the center, calm, deliberate, his presence an unspoken challenge to every hierarchy in the room. He had emerged from the shadows of humanity's exile not as a conqueror, but as a herald. His voice, resonant and unhurried, carried the weight of millennia and the certainty of truth. You have built your civilization on fragments of our language, on scripts we left behind not as scripture, but as safeguards, Elias said. You turned lessons into commandments and systems into deities. You misread every warning and called it holy. Murmurs erupted from the assembly. Delegates leaned forward, their alien features twisting between awe, fear, and indignation. Karuan raised a hand, claws trembling, attempting to regain control. This is heresy. Your words, your species, cannot claim authority over millennia of galactic order. Elias met the priest's gaze evenly. Authority is not claimed. It is earned through understanding. You have misunderstood your own systems for thousands of cycles. That misunderstanding risks everything. He gestured to the chamber walls, alive with alien inscriptions that now pulsed faintly at his presence. With a single word in the first tongue, symbols flared, rearranging themselves into sequences none of the delegates could read. The air hummed with energy as dormant mechanisms awoke, resonating with the human's touch. Karuan staggered backward, his claws scraping the polished stone in alarm. You cannot control." "I do not seek to control," Elias interrupted. "I seek to reveal. The glyphs you worship are not divine, they are memory. Safeguards designed by our ancestors to preserve knowledge, to prevent destruction. You have activated them prematurely, without comprehension, and now the galaxy teeters on the edge of truths it is not ready for." Whispers spread through the convocation like wildfire. Alien delegates drew closer to Karuan, seeking guidance. He had none to give. Every instinct, every doctrine, every ritual he had memorized now crumbled under the weight of Elias's revelation. "You speak of safeguards," Karuan said, his voice shaking. "Yet you reveal them publicly. Why not remain hidden, as your kind did?" Elias's eyes narrowed, sharp but patient. "Because you have begun to awaken what you cannot yet wield responsibly. Secrets kept too long decay into danger. Systems built on forgotten knowledge become unstable when activated blindly. I speak now to prevent catastrophe, not to reclaim dominion." A tremor ran through the chamber. The walls pulsed in response, alive with recognition. Symbols glimmered, forming patterns that even Karuan had never seen. The priest's own sacred scripts now made sense in a new, terrifying context. They were fragments of human legacy, misinterpreted and misapplied for eons. The convocation erupted. Some delegates attempted to silence Elias, calling for execution, for containment. Others froze in disbelief, their culture's histories rewritten in real time. Karuan's voice, once commanding, became an echo of doubt. "If what you claim is true, then humanity was never as primitive as we believed. Your species shaped the galaxy before we even existed." "Yes," Elias said quietly. "We shaped it, and we withdrew, not to vanish, but to prevent misuse. We left safeguards, languages, and relics. You misread them, and in your hubris, you built your civilizations on the shadows of our legacy." A deeper tremor shook the chamber. Symbols on the walls flared brightly, illuminating the faces of all present with a light that carried knowledge rather than warmth. Karuan sank to one knee, his staff abandoned. Authority, tradition, and faith, everything he had trusted, slid through his fingers like sand. "You awakened history without understanding," Elias said. "Now you must choose. Continue as you are, risking collapse, or acknowledge the truth and act with responsibility." The chamber fell silent. All eyes, alien and human, were fixed on the single figure who had returned from exile, not as a conqueror, but as a messenger. Karuan's mind spun, trying to reconcile decades of doctrine with the undeniable proof before him. The first tongue, thought extinct, was alive. The systems built on human design were waking, and humanity itself, long believed absent, had returned, not to rule, but to remind. "Why now?" Karuan asked finally, voice hoarse. "Why reveal yourselves after millennia of absence?" Elias's gaze swept the convocation, settling back on the priest. "Because the galaxy began speaking our language again. You dug too deep, activated too much, and awakened what was never meant to be dormant. History does not wait. It speaks first, and now it speaks through us." The walls pulsed one last time, steady and deliberate, as though the temple itself had chosen a new voice. The tremor subsided, leaving the chamber charged with anticipation and unease. Karuan looked around at the assembly, realizing the truth that had been staring him in the face. The central conflict was no longer faith versus heresy, nor alien versus human. It was responsibility versus ignorance, understanding versus fear, and humanity, long exiled, long underestimated, had returned to hold the scales. Elias Ward, human, exiled and returned, stood at the center of it all, a calm eye in a storm of revelation, guiding the galaxy toward an awakening that could no longer be ignored. The chamber, once tense with uncertainty, now thrummed with a latent power that no alien structure had felt in millennia. Symbols along the walls, awakened by Elias Ward's words, pulsed with clarity. They were no longer fragments or warnings. They were instructions, systems, the living record of humanity's design, long buried and misinterpreted by countless species. High Priest Karuan remained on his knees, staff abandoned, eyes wide in disbelief. Delegates murmured, some frozen in awe, others trembling at the realization that everything they had revered was human in origin. The very foundations of their faith and authority had shifted, and for the first time in the galaxy's history, a human, not alien, was the pivot of understanding. Elias stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the assembly. These systems were built for guidance, not worship. They respond to comprehension, not ritual. You have activated them prematurely, and now they demand awareness. From beneath the chamber floor, dormant mechanisms stirred. Panels slid open, revealing a lattice of circuits and conduits, long hidden. Light cascaded upward, forming a holographic map of stars, planets, and ancient pathways. It was humanity's legacy, woven across the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as custodians. Karuan rose shakily, claws brushing the floor. If this is truly your work, human, what are you seeking? Domination? Elias shook his head.
No.
Correction. Guidance. Responsibility. Humanity withdrew so that the galaxy could survive, not to claim it. But our systems are awakening, and what you misunderstand as ritual is only the framework we left for civilization to follow safely. Delegates shifted uneasily. Many had already begun to grasp that their faith, their laws, even their political structures were built atop human-designed safeguards. Fear rippled through the room. Fear of the unknown, fear of being wrong, fear of obsolescence. Karuan swallowed, then asked, voice low but urgent. Then what is expected of us? How do we act without falling into catastrophe? Elias extended his hand toward the holographic lattice. You must learn, study, comprehend, and align your actions with knowledge rather than faith. Systems that guided your civilizations must now guide you consciously. Human legacy is not conquest, it is stewardship. That is the responsibility you bear. A ripple of understanding passed through the assembly. Some delegates began tentatively examining the holograms, tracing lines, recognizing patterns. Others stared, paralyzed, struggling to absorb a truth that had been hidden for eons. The priest's voice, once commanding, now carried a mixture of humility and awe. All this was humanity's design? Our religion, our power structures, mere fragments of your architecture? Yes, Elias said. You misinterpreted them, yes, but the misinterpretation was necessary for survival. The galaxy could not have handled the truth all at once. But now, the systems are awakening fully, and understanding is no longer optional. A faint hum filled the chamber. The lattice pulsed in harmony with Elias's presence, extending outward beyond the temple, reaching the far edges of known space. Light illuminated clusters of systems long thought dormant, revealing pathways, resources, and safeguards that only a human mind could fully interpret. Karuan sank to his knees again, not in despair this time, but in reverence. We are witnessing humanity reclaiming its place in the galaxy. Elias's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. We are not reclaiming. We never left our responsibility. You were simply unaware of it. You are now part of the story we preserved. Learn it. Respect it. Act wisely. The tremors ceased. The symbols on the walls glowed steadily, no longer warning, no longer dormant. They were alive, fully aligned with human understanding. The assembly exhaled collectively, a mixture of relief and awe, aware that the galaxy had shifted beneath their feet. Karuan looked up at Elias, voice barely above a whisper. Why now? Why reveal yourselves after so long? Elias allowed a small, rare smile. Because the galaxy began speaking our language again. You awakened what we left dormant. History cannot remain silent forever. And now it speaks through us. Delegates watched as Elias traced a path on the holographic map. Star systems long forgotten or misaligned began to stabilize. Ancient human safeguards corrected anomalies, ensuring planetary systems, energy flows, and civilizations could function without collapse. The galaxy itself seemed to breathe more steadily, as if relieved that its first caretakers had returned to guide it once more. Karun finally bowed his head. Then humanity has never truly been absent. We were mistaken to think otherwise. No, Elias said softly. Humanity survived, endured, and now returns, not as conquerors, but as guardians. You will act as stewards alongside us, learning the balance we preserved. The chamber pulsed one final time. The first tongue, spoken by a human, resonated fully through the temple, through the lattice, through the galaxy. Its words were not commands, not laws, not prayers. They were truth. Elias stepped back, letting the assembly absorb the revelation. History is not written by power alone, he said. It is preserved by those who understand it. We are human. We endure. And now, the galaxy will remember. The room fell silent, not in fear, but in reverent comprehension. The human's voice, long forgotten, had returned. The galaxy, awakened to its first architects, would never be the same again. And for the first time in millennia, humanity stood at the center of the galaxy, not as rulers, but as the guiding hand that ensured the stars would remember their true origin.